All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Really encouraged to see a full room today for this event marking a really important and fairly grim anniversary of 3 years now of civil war in Sudan. We will be joined shortly by Senators Warner and Booker. They are just wrapping up some votes over in the Capitol, and then they'll make their way over and join us for remarks in a few moments once they finish up there. I'm Jeremy Knindike. I'm the president of Refugees International. We are really proud to be co-organizing this event today along with our colleagues from the Sudanese diaspora here in the United States. Sudan is today the largest humanitarian emergency in the world. The UN estimates that around 33 million people in Sudan. That is more people than, for example, the entire population of Syria. 33 million people in Sudan need humanitarian assistance. 9 million people have been displaced internally within Sudan, and another 4.5 million people have sought refuge in neighboring countries outside Sudan. So that's more than 13 million people who have been displaced by this war. It's an enormous figure. And the humanitarian needs, of course, are terrifying and discouraging. Even grimmer has been the violence against civilians that has characterized both sides' conduct in this war, but particularly the genocidal violence that has been carried out by the Rapid Support Forces paramilitary group with the backing of foreign partners, including most notably the United Arab Emirates. And that has been assessed by the U.S. government. The Biden administration, before they left office, formally issued a determination that genocide had occurred in Darfur at the hands of the RSF. A recent UN fact-finding mission that looked into the violence that the RSF unleashed on the town of El Fasher in Darfur last fall likewise found evidence of the hallmarks that they characterized as the hallmarks of genocide. And there is a history and there is a pedigree here. The RSF comes out of the Janjaweed militia of 20 years ago that similarly, 2 decades ago, a generation ago, also committed genocide in Darfur. And so we continue to see these challenges, we continue to see these problems, and the role of outside actors is really important and needs more attention. We're very glad to see leadership from a number of members here on the Hill taking on this issue. Senator Booker, who will be joining us in a little while, has put out a resolution that would expand the arms embargo, or would call on the UN rather, to expand the arms embargo on Sudan, which right now only applies to Darfur, a legacy of that genocide 20 years ago, and really needs now to apply to the whole country. Representative Smith in the House has called for has put out a proposed bill calling for a U.S. special envoy, as we have long traditionally had in the U.S. government, to be appointed to tackle this issue. And Representative Sarah Jacobs has a bill that she has introduced that also calls for sanctions or calls for consequences for the UAE for their arms supply to the Rapid Support Forces, which has enabled much of their genocidal violence. Refugees International has joined with a number of other organizations in issuing a letter that reinforces the need for congressional action. The bills that I've mentioned and several others that are out there are very important. We need to see Congress move on them. We also need to see the administration take this issue more seriously. Frankly, it feels a little bit orphaned right now within the Trump administration. But it's also not a particularly partisan issue, and it is one of those rare issues in this day and age that should be conducive to bipartisan congressional action. Refugees International has done some really interesting polling recently looking at public views on the war in Sudan and has found there really is no significant partisan divide. The American people in general, while Sudan is not necessarily high in terms of salience, they're very aligned in terms of wanting to see the U.S. and believing the U.S. should have a role in trying to bring peace to Sudan. And that is not a right issue or a left issue. It's simply a a common bipartisan view. So in this letter that we recently signed onto with a number of other groups, with more than 60 organizations, we called for action from Congress in 4 broad areas. First, to pass legislation calling on the administration to put together and put into place a strategy that would advance and uphold the protection of civilians inside Sudan, support accountability for those who have been fueling the atrocities inside Sudan, and in particular, to hold to account the United Arab Emirates for its arms flows to the RSF. But it's not just the UAE. They're the most egregious case, but other partners in the region, other countries in the region are also flowing arms to the Sudanese armed forces. All of that needs to stop, and all of that needs to be held to account. Second, as Representative Smith's bill calls for, it's really important that the administration appoint a special envoy who would oversee the implementation of that sort of a strategy. You know, as we've seen in the past, it is at times difficult for the crisis in Sudan to break through all of the other foreign policy issues that are swirling around the U.S. government at any point in time. And so having a presidentially appointed special envoy who is really empowered to elevate those issues to the top of the foreign policy making process can help to cut through all of that. Third, in order to reconvene congressional action on Sudan on the Hill, we're urging the reestablishment of a Sudan caucus. If you go back 20 years to the Save Darfur era, there was a very active Sudan caucus on the Hill that could convene sessions like this, convene activism, convene congressional action and legislation. Welcome. So great to have you all. This is our panel, who we'll introduce in just a moment. So we're calling for the reestablishment of a congressional Sudan caucus on a bipartisan basis to give these issues a home here on the Hill. And finally, Congress needs to ramp up oversight. As I said earlier, the administration has not done nearly enough. It has not done very much on Sudan. And that's true on the policy front. That's true in terms of engagement with the countries that are flowing arms into Sudan. It's also true when it comes to the appalling lack of humanitarian aid. So far this year, the U.S. government has only sent in about $220 million of humanitarian aid to Sudan. That is dramatically lower than in past years. There's no assurance that there will be any more coming. And to put that in perspective, the figure in the last year of the Biden administration was about triple that. Now, certainly needs now are not a third what they were in 2024. If anything, they're higher. And kind of adding insult to injury, the administration is sitting on about $10 billion worth of humanitarian aid funding that has been appropriated but has not yet been spent. So the issue here is not that there's not enough money. There's plenty of money. The administration needs to spend it. And for that, we need congressional oversight to push them to do so. So with that, I want to, while we await Senators Booker and Warner, who should be here momentarily, maybe we can first introduce our panel, and then we'll welcome them, the senators, for some remarks when they make it over from votes. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Hardin Lang, our Vice President for Programs and Policy, to introduce our really amazing, stellar panel of activists. Hardin.
Jeremy, thank you very much for setting the table. That was great. A real sort of tour de table of the issues that we're facing and the challenges and pieces of legislation that are up here on the Hill. So what we're going to do for the next, while we're waiting Senator Warner and Senator Booker, we have an amazing panel with us today to help us unpack this. And what's particularly special about it is their ability to speak about the reality on the ground in a number of different parts of the country that are being hit hard by the conflict. And not only to talk about that reality, but to also frame it in terms of what Sudanese responders, who are not only just the backbone, but basically essentially the entirety of the effort on the ground to meet these needs in a way that's quite extraordinary. So what they will be able to bring to this is a real depth of understanding about what those conditions look like, but then also how decisions here in Washington can connect with those outcomes in a way that's profound. And just to do a little housekeeping ahead of time, we'll talk for about 15 or 20 minutes after the senators come to give their intervention. And then we'll have a question and answer period, hopefully about 10 or 15 minutes. And we'll pull out a microphone here, and people can just walk up and speak from there will be the plan. So just to begin with, on my immediate right, we have Imi Mahmoud, who is a renowned poet, has founded multiple humanitarian organizations. Senator Warner. Please. Well, why don't we actually, sir, thank you very much for joining us. We can go directly to your remarks if you'd like.
Did the panel get introduced?
We're in the process of doing that right now.
Introduce.
Fantastic. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Imi Mahmoud, who has also founded a number of humanitarian organizations. She's a Time 100 list specialist and also works on the intersection of finance, policy, and a number of issues. And we're really grateful to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Imam, to the next, is a surgeon and founder of the IDP Humanitarian Network and has been working on humanitarian response from a survivor perspective across Sudan and Darfur for decades. And we're very grateful to have you here. Niamat Ahmadi is the founder and president of Darfur Women's Action Group, and she has been working as a leader on these sets of issues for the better part of a couple of decades, both from anywhere from the Security Council to here in the Senate. So we're very grateful to have her with us today. And Haneen Ahmed is one of the external relations officer and a real leader amongst the emergency response room movement in Sudan, and is also a Refugees International fellow. So we're very grateful to have the panel here today. But before we get into that conversation, Senator, could we give you the opportunity to make some remarks?
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for including me in this incredibly important discussion. I want to, first of all, not only acknowledge the panel and the expertise they bring, but I want to acknowledge my dear friend Maureen White, who has helped educate me on this issue. I think we're going to be joined later by Cory Booker, who also helped educate me. And there is the person I probably spent the most time with is Tom Perriello, who under President Biden, was launched as a special envoy. We all know that today is a fairly grim milestone. Third year of this conflict. We're entering into the fourth year, and we all know that this is the largest humanitarian crisis in the world at this point. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I always try to make clear to all of my colleagues every day is that more people die and are displaced every day in Sudan than in Gaza and Ukraine combined. And the world, for the most part, ignores this. Part of that is due to, obviously, the fact that there is not good press access, but there is still a huge, I think, responsibility of the international press, particularly the American press, to spend more time. I know Maureen and I joined with a number of nationally renowned journalists about 9 or 10 months ago, and the fact that they were not even aware of what's happening is a crime and frankly a huge mistake. I've also gotten the chance through this crisis to get to know members of the Sudanese diaspora. We have a very large Sudanese diaspora in Virginia. Proud of the fact that I've got members of that community on my staff. I'm proud to have joined recently with a iftar with my Sudanese community. And the thing that is so remarkable to me is I just wish the world knew more about this story, how the young people in Sudan, literally after with Bashir, the former dictator, the longest-serving dictator, I believe, for most of the latter half of the 20th century and beginning of the 21st century, wasn't he there for close to 40-plus years, Bashir? The fact that the Sudanese people, particularly young people, said, we want to make a Sudan that is inclusive, that is fair, that reflects democracy and other values, and to see the young people and energy was involved was really remarkable. And then to see what has happened in terms of the warring factors with both the SAF and the RSF. One of the things that I am, and I know people feel strongly on this issue, so I don't want to, I'll only offend half of you, as I tried to make my pitch to try to other senators and other groups to get involved. Candidly, both the SAF and the RSF have blood on their hands. There is no good guys in this group. And if there was ever a case of where the power of the United States could be brought to bear, it is in this conflict. With the Emiratis supporting the RSF, with more and more Egypt and the Saudis supporting SAF, and now we've got other factors, including the Russians and others, playing in. As many of you know, I am not a fan or supporter of President Trump. But if President Trump actually wanted to win a Nobel Peace Prize, I mean, legitimately win a Nobel Peace Prize, rather than simply trying to take it from, the leader of the opposition in Venezuela, with his ability to say let's just start with the Saudis and the Emiratis, cut it out. He is uniquely situated to be able to do that. Yet we still have not even had a real envoy named. So the killing goes on. The humanitarian crisis goes on. The kind of stories coming out of El-Fasher over the last few months have been chilling. The notion that, that SAF took back over Khartoum, and I know there's some efforts, but this war should not continue. And what I want to commit to you is that I keep trying to rally support amongst my colleagues. I also, like many, you are all tired of hearing politicians offering thoughts and prayers. I've actually written checks, so I have more than thoughts and prayers, but I've been proud to support the Sudanese physicians. I've been very proud to support the ERR effort. Frankly, the ERR effort should have won the Nobel Prize, and I think we need to promote the ERRs again for the Nobel Peace Prize going forward, because this is a catastrophe on the world stage that we can and should and must end. We know that I think back about the Biden administration, there were many mistakes the Biden administration made, but the idea that with even the mistakes made, that when we have the new administration come in and totally dismantle USAID, it is both morally wrong and economically wrong, and decreases America's standing when we allow American paid-for medicine to sit on ships in Port Sudan and not be able to be offloaded because we won't pay the $1 or $2 a day for those aid workers to get that American medicine distributed. It's insane. So I am, all in. I was fairly. Remember when I first started getting involved in this, I bring all of the naivete of a new guy thinking, oh gosh, this shouldn't be that hard. We got two groups, generals who are interested in themselves, not interested in the nation. They are supported as clients by major powers that we have enormous influence over. And I thought, okay, well, we can get this done quickly. Well, I'm now about 2 years in. Those of you who were at this panel are years in or lifetimes in. I just hope that you can continue to count on me as a supporter, count on me if we need to bring further resolutions to the table. One of the things that Maureen's her husband Steve mentioned, and I offer this humbly as a suggestion, we ought to have in the Sudanese crisis chapter at every college in America. You know, young people come, no, hear me out on this. Young people come to college, they join the Democrats, the Republicans, they join the chess club. But on so many colleges, and this is the legitimate cause, I'm not undermining the legitimate cause around the challenges of the Palestinian people, but on most college campuses, there is no other recognition of crises that go around the world. And boy, oh boy, since there are no good guys, there is moral clarity in the issue of Sudan because we know the current standing. You don't even have to pick a side. You just have to pick the side of the humanity of not allowing this crisis to continue on a humanitarian basis, on a starvation basis. And it literally is, for a country like America, we're talking less than pennies on the dollar. So I commend everyone who is here. I'll try to be careful since everything I say can and will be used against me at some point. But rest assured, I have raised this issue repeatedly with Secretary Rubio, and I still maintain some hope that we can get a significant envoy name, that we can build this up on a national agenda. And let me make a bold commitment and promise. I will even write the nomination letter for President Trump to win the Nobel Peace Prize, which, considering how I view this president, will be a really hard thing for me to do if he is willing to bring the power and prestige of his office just to the proxy nations who depend upon American support. I am so grateful again for so many of staff and congressional folks who are here. Our America's strength, I always have believed, has been, yes, it's our economy, yes, it's our military, but it is also the fact that even though we make lots and lots of mistakes in America, I think the rest of the world realizes that the world is better off when we have strong American moral leadership. We've kind of put that in jeopardy over the last year. I will make some, I say this with full disclosure, that my grandparents on my mother's side were Canadian. It's hard to piss off the Canadians. But we have done that. And when countries that normally believe in strong American leadership, when we don't provide that leadership, the rest of the world wanders. So we need to end this civil war. We need to bring those responsible, I believe, ultimately to justice. And in the meantime, please, I will continue to put my personal money where my mouth is on this, as opposed to thoughts and prayers. But if there are more things that I can do, please count on me. And again, and again, everybody in this room has stories, but the stories I've heard from the Sudanese community in Virginia are heartbreaking beyond belief, of families that have been split aside, a young couple that left their daughter 3.5 years ago as they tried to leave and who have not been able to get their daughter out of country. So thank you for the panel's expertise. Thank you all for your interest. And together, let's make sure that there is not a 4th year anniversary of this war, and that this is the year we bring this crisis to an end. So thank you all, and God bless you.
Thank you, Senator Warner. And thank you so much for your leadership on everything from support for temporary protected status for Sudanese to humanitarian assistance, to support for Tom Perriello when he was in the job, and trying to find more folks who can take up the leadership position as special envoy. All of this has been tremendous. For the accountability agenda that you've been willing to champion, we're incredibly grateful for your leadership on this.
As we all know, saying thanks, I appreciate. Ending the killing and the starvation is what we need to actually hold me and everyone else accountable. Again, we are way past the time for thoughts and prayers, so count me in on anything else I can do.
We also did start the college chapters. They're called FAIR.
Pardon me?
We started the college chapters. They're called FAIR.
I know the students.
Yeah, exactly.
We have one at George Mason.
We have several.
We ought to have one at every university in America.
We have it, some at like 20. We'll spread them.
We are trying to push. We are trying to push more. I think there ought to be on every campus in America.
We could not agree more. Thank you. So I believe Senator Booker will also be joining us shortly. Indeed. But before that, Haneen, do you mind if I turn to you first? Because Senator Warner sort of invoked the ERRs and the call for them to win the Nobel Peace Prize. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about the role of the ERRs, particularly the situation where the ones you're closest to are operational, and then pull that back maybe a little bit about the steps that could be taken by folks here in this building to support that effort.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for RI to give us this platform to amplify Sudanese voices on really sad day of third anniversary of the Sudan war. The Emergency Response Room is a grassroots movement serving with 26,000 volunteers across 118 states, 18 localities across all Sudan, delivering humanitarian aid and filling the gap during this hard situation. We have a structured body. We are running right now approximate to $40 million through the Localization Coordination Council, which is a platform that we innovate to receive the fund localized and localized resources. Getting back to the question, for the staff side, emergency response room, we have 80 states, approximately 85 localities across those staff side control area with 35 million civilians. 45 of them are women. So we reach out to 13 million beneficiary in 2025, and we aim to reach out to 20 million in 2026. So situation is devastating actually because the international community have an access right now, but they don't have the know-how and the access and the capabilities to serve those Sudanese people due to the different morals for the people who are living from area to another and keep moving from area to another. Also, they are ignoring that the emergency response room, as Senator Warner said, like we came together to make the democracy. And when war broke out, we came together again. We stood, and I rose, and my colleague rose to initiate the emergency response room to unify the Sudanese community fabric, which is destroyed completely by war. And right now, we are all together. We are approximately the only body across Sudan are able to work across 18 states, 118 localities, despite all differences. So when the international community or some organization denied to funding us or reduce the funding due to some restriction, some of them are controllable, some of them are not. So they said that like, we have an accessibility, we cannot work with you anymore. So they destroy this community fabric that we built. They destroy this movement of keeping people together. I'll stop here.
Haneen, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Another thing that Senator Warner talked a bit about Emmy, was what happened in Al-Fashir. And I know that that struck quite close to home for you. I don't know, perhaps you could sort of take us to where that moment is now, and then maybe ladder that back up to the national level. I'd be grateful for your observations.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for being here and for the panel as well. And it was very touching to hear Senator Warner's remarks, because it really struck a chord with so much of what we also believe and have been pushing and advocating for, almost screaming into the abyss for decades. What I am saying now, as somebody who is a survivor of Darfur genocide and from Al-Fashir, is that it was one of the most harrowing moments for us of all time. I want you to close your eyes and picture how it is that we found out. Imagine that you are sitting in your home, and the next day you find out that all of a sudden you can't reach anyone on the ground. Everything went dark. There was a complete blackout. And all of our humanitarian counterparts on the ground, including the NRC and everyone else that we work with to deliver last mile aid and, food in Darfur, even till the last moments of Al-Fashir, they were asking, have you heard anything? Have you heard anything? And we knew the worst had happened. The next thing you know, the videos start coming out. I see my cousin's face lighting up the screen. She looks different. Drained. And I hear the Janjaweed, which is what they still call themselves, the RSF. They were yelling at her, get up if you can. Get up if you can. And I see the bullet holes in her thobe. They not only killed her in that moment, my cousin Latifa, but they were gloating over her body, and they were broadcasting it themselves. And then I watched every part of the town that I grew up in, went to school in, went back to volunteer in the hospitals. I saw when they executed all the patients, executed the patients in the barely working hospitals, in in the Faculty of Medicine. I saw what they did in Al Saudi. I saw our old streets and our old homes being destroyed. I already thought I had seen enough when just like a little bit into the war, I saw our old family home riddled with bullets and, hit with the Donnas and such, and we lost so many family members. I thought I had already seen enough when my uncle Habib, may he rest in peace, while he was trying to restock one of our community kitchens, because at that point, at 500 days of siege, 500 days of famine, of siege that led to famine, people had resorted to eating animal feed embeds, and then the embeds ran out, and we were doing everything we can, and you had to wait until the drones leave the sky, but they don't leave the sky for days. So imagine when you already thought the worst had already happened, what unfolds before you. I not only found out again for the millionth time in the past several decades, but especially the past couple of years, that my cousin or my aunt or whoever was killed by having to go through the videos of the Janjaweed broadcasting their atrocities, their war crimes. The difference between the early 2000s, which we escaped, 3 of us on this panel are survivors of the genocide, 2 are original whistleblowers. The difference is that this time the genocide was live streamed, and it never, ever, ever ended. So what I want to say is that in that moment, seeing the people thrown in the ditches, having already heard that 1-year-olds were raped, having already seen what we thought was the worst, we saw entire families hanging from trees. We saw the bullets not stop even when, clearly, the bodies of our friends and family members and volunteers who didn't stop until even the last days of the siege. Even when their bodies had stopped moving, their bodies kept moving because the bullets kept coming. This was how we found out that Al-Fashir had fallen, and they killed 30,000 of us in just a couple of hours, 72 hours. And what's so crazy about this is that we had warned everyone. I wrote in the New York Times in the 2nd anniversary that the Darfur genocide never ended, that this entire thing is a continuation of the genocide, that the war is all over Sudan, but the genocide is in Darfur. Why? Why does that matter? It matters because when people ask, why was there such a specialized brutality in El Fasher and in Darfur and in indigenous areas that we're going to be talking about? And why is it that the same atrocities we have been subject to for decades, even before Darfur, in South Sudan and other areas as well, because as Dr. Imam says, we woke up and there was already war. We were born and there was already war. Why was the same atrocities and systemic violence that has been used to erase Darfurians used everywhere else? Because this war was completely preventable if the Darfur genocide had ended. The last thing I want to say is, second to last thing, hello, Senator Booker. Raise your hands if you've ever heard of the Darfur genocide. Now, keep it up. Only put it down if you've heard of the end of the Darfur genocide. Has anyone heard of the end of the Darfur genocide? No. No, because it hasn't ended. So the thing that I want to say is that there is hope, because as we've learned on the front lines for more than 20 years, responding to this, the longest war, second longest, because our civil war in South Sudan and North Sudan went on for 21 years and 1 million people were killed. This is, what now, 20-something years, 21 years as well. What we learned is that we are not responding alone anymore. And, you know, for us, it was great to see that the world was listening finally. But what it comes to mind for me as a Goodwill Ambassador for UNHCR, even though I'm here representing the Darfur Task Force and my own understanding, is that the old Commissioner Ogata, who was a woman, she's late, may she rest in peace, she said that there are no humanitarian solutions to humanitarian problems. When people hear that, they think that she meant there are no humanitarian solutions to humanitarian problems because they are hopeless. They think about Gaza, Ukraine, Yemen. They think about Iran right now. They think about the Congo. They think about all of these things that we're being inundated with that actually have been going on for a long time. But like I said, the only difference now is that it's live streamed, right? Just like the genocide in Darfur. They think about these things and they think, there's no solutions. But what she meant is that there are no humanitarian solutions to humanitarian problems because humanitarian problems are not caused by our humanity. Instead, there are state solutions, there are political solutions, there are financial solutions, there are innovative solutions. And that is why we are here reaching out and saying that these problems that are the toughest problems of our time should be solved by the greatest minds of our time and the greatest hearts as well. And so what she left us with is what I always say, no matter where I'm speaking, whether it was advocating for Syria when I was younger, or like Darfur since age 10. I became a public speaker when I was 10. Or, you know, at my closing graduation at Yale, that happened 18 years after I was hiding under the bed in Darfur from the same soldiers that are trampling all over our country right now. I said that none of us are free until all of us are free. And so a world that says it's okay for 1-year-olds to be raped in El Fasher, my hometown, is the same world that says it's okay for children to starve in Yemen, for people to be killed everywhere else as well. And so none of us are free until all of us are free is my message. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emmy. Very powerful words. Senator Booker, could we give you the floor? Thank you so much for joining us.
I take a lot of heart from this full room and everyone's here, and I really want to thank Refugee International, not just for this important discussion, but for this stepping forward into what I think has been a void of global leadership on this crisis. I want to thank my colleague, I don't see him here, but Mark Warner, who's provided such great leadership in the Senate on Sudan, as has Chris Coons and a number of my other colleagues. I'm really grateful, if not in awe, of the panelists that are here to do what urgently needs to be done, which is for people to stand up and share their lived experiences, their firsthand expertise, their heart and their spirit, in hopes that they could ignite and awaken the heart and the spirit of others. I think we are one human family, and I'm grateful for the advocates, humanitarian workers, members of the Sudanese diaspora, that are all here for your continued engagement on this horrific crisis and your call to the conscience of the world. Today, April 15th, marks 3 years since the outbreak of the war in Sudan, as I'm sure has been said numerous times today. Since April 2023, the Sudanese Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces have waged a violent, unrelenting conflict, forcing the people of Sudan to bear the brutal cost of this power struggle. The world's worst humanitarian crisis, the worst humanitarian crisis in a world that has too many humanitarian crises. More than 13 million people being displaced, 29 million people facing acute hunger who rely on humanitarian assistance just for their basic survival. Civilians, women, children, journalists, workers who face egregious violations of human rights and dignity, as we have just heard. As we speak, as we gather here today, both parties and allied militias continue to target civilians, destroy infrastructure, block humanitarian access, and bring this moral crisis deeper and deeper into reality. In Darfur and across Sudan, communities have been cut off from food, from medicine, from life-saving assistance. When I went up to the border of Chad and Sudan, I saw a humanitarian crisis like I've never seen before, and I've visited refugee camps all over the world. It was staggering, it was sobering. And the United States has determined that the Rapid Support Forces have committed genocide, and the Sudanese armed forces have committed crimes against humanity. Yet outside actors continue to fuel and facilitate the length and lethality of this war that has no military solution. There is no military solution to this conflict. We are at a moment that demands accountability and urgent action, not just by those who are in that nation or in that region, but for all of us. Silence right now is complicity in this crisis. Our inability as a human family to focus on the worst humanitarian crisis is unacceptable as a crisis is deepening. We understand that the international response is coming under continued strain. The Trump administration's shameful retreat from humanitarian assistance in multilateral organizations is having real consequences. The Trump administration's assault on USAID and other U.S. commitments has made this crisis worsen. Even when the U.S. was boosting aid to Sudan, the international response was not enough then. Not enough in Sudan, not enough in bordering communities, hosting refugees. It was inadequate before the cuts of the Trump administration. Again, when I was there at the Chad-Sudan border, I saw firsthand how extraordinary humanitarian partners were seeking to stand in the breach, standing in increasingly difficult situations, doing their best to allocate limited resources. I heard firsthand from Sudanese who were fleeing their conflicts. The stories that they shared with me are still seared into my memory and into my heart. They told me the most heartbreaking, heart-shattering stories of the trauma and violence they endured in Sudan, to see firsthand courageous women who carried their children through miles of desert. I hold those stories with me as I now try in every way to encourage my colleagues and an administration on how the U.S. must do more to end this war. I'm going to continue to work with my colleagues. I introduced a bipartisan resolution calling on the UN Security Council to enforce the existing arms embargo on Darfur and extend the embargo, which is vital to extend that embargo to all of Sudan. That's why I've called on the Trump administration to appoint a special envoy to Sudan, so this is more focused in an administration that seems to have a blind spot to the entire continent of Africa. This is why I've called on the Quad to press for a ceasefire and a credible political transition. And that is why today's event is so important right here in our nation's capital, because it's critical for us to hear from Sudanese voices and learn from their firsthand accounts, understand their analysis, and be a part of their hope for Sudan's future. As a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I remain committed to working with my colleagues to strengthen our response, but as a member of the human race, I am committed to joining with others of good conscience, to join with others with a greater moral imagination. Our world should not have crises such as this. We are all implicated. It's not just about who's to blame. It's about all of us bearing greater responsibility. The people of Sudan cannot afford for the world to be looking away. I will remain a prisoner of hope. And today's gathering gives that hope more strength, not just for survival, but that once and for all, hope will reign supreme in the reality of peace in Sudan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. Those were incredibly powerful words, and thank you for all of your leadership, both for the aid, for the diplomacy, and for the question of accountability. These are all absolutely essential issues in this agenda on Sudan, and I'm just very grateful for that leadership. Speaking of sort of accountability and for current moments, Niamat, do you mind if I turn to you very quickly and see if you could offer some thoughts and reflections on what you've heard, but also what you're seeing and hearing and what your colleagues are seeing and hearing, both in places in the Kordofans and Blue Nile and other areas that are being hit by new rounds of violence that are now reverberating in other parts across the country.
Thank you for Refugee International and our colleague for organizing this. I'm also eternally grateful for Senator Warner and Senator Booker for joining us today to bring attention to the people of Sudan. And indeed, as dismayed and horrified I am to be speaking about the third years of the devastating crisis in Sudan, I'm hopeful to see that the engagement by Senate and policymakers here, this will bring hope because back in the days, during the early Darfur genocide, there were demonstrable leadership, bipartisan leadership among senators and members of Congress who spoke up, and the people who survived remain living in camps until today were due to that leadership and attention that was brought, and the instruments were enforced. Unfortunately, in the recent years, we haven't seen this attention being brought to Sudan, and we are hopeful that this will continue and that Senator Warner and Senator Booker will continue to lead and bring more of a coalition of Senate bipartisan group to stand up for Sudan, and hopefully that we can bring strong U.S. stand to end this crisis. Speaking about echoing of the current situation in Sudan, it is 3 years of this destruction and mass displacement of across Sudan, but also attack on women that was systematically being directed and become the most prominent feature of the current war in Sudan that often is not being talked about. As the Sudan Armed Forces crafting territories moving into some regions, the rapid support forces, unfortunately, are being pushed back into regions that historically being marginalized and devastated by constant and repeated genocide. As Amy mentioned, the attack in Darfur and the massacre and the murder that is committed in Al-Fashir, it is happening right now in Kadugli and in Dalang, South Kordofan. And most horrifying is to see that the Blue Nile has been one of the stable regions throughout the 3 years of the war in Sudan, now a city of Al-Kormog, a strategic city that linking the corner of Sudan, South Sudan, and Ethiopia, has recently been taken over by the rapid support forces. Drone attack, including the day before yesterday in my hometown. So as we warn about Al-Fashir, and it did happen today, we are warning you all about Kordofan, and not only South Kordofan, but West Kordofan, North Kordofan. These are the areas that nobody talked about it. Areas are already lacking means of sustenance. It's a desert area. People were pushed out of their home, living in the midst of nowhere. Nobody knows about them. 80% of the people displaced across the Sudan have yet to be reached. Mostly in Darfur, Kordofan, these are the people that have been moving multiple times. The people of South Kordofan from the 80s, during the struggle of South Sudanese, they are still now repeatedly being displaced. Recently attack on kindergarten, mass number of children were killed. We have seen in Al-Fashir how women were shot and killed because they remained the last. They were thinking women will be preserved, but unfortunately they were shot and killed because staying around, helping people represent a form of resistance to this genocide. Fleeing the early Darfur genocide 25 years ago, I never thought I would be sitting in front of you speaking about another genocide. We understand that this war has devastated the entire Sudan. But the reality of this war in Darfur and in South Kordofan and the Blue Nile is very different because these are the regions that singled out, and the people, the indigenous people there, were singled out systematically, ethnically motivated. When the rapid support forces marched into a city, they make sure they murder everyone. They loot every single drop of food and the market and put cities under siege, like what they are doing right now in Kadugli and Dalan, and they did in Al-Fashir before. We have witnessed people starving to death because simply they stayed around to help others. In Al-Fashir, like Amy, scrolling through the pictures, I see the body of my cousin, my nephews, and my uncle couldn't live with the fact that he couldn't see the bodies of his sons, that he wasn't able to bury them. My mom, who's 85 years old, she said, I'm not leaving, I will be staying at 85. I don't want to die in someone else's land. It is a form of resistance. That's the only way to resist a genocide. Many people like my mom stayed in Al-Fashir and got killed. We have families who are separated. We don't know what their whereabouts. And because this is happening, that the world decided to look the other way. Our leaders choose to look the other way in the face of genocide. And this crisis is a cost of accountability. We cried for justice and peace for years on Darfur. The genocide in Darfur that has not been resolved is now promoted the fact that if it worked for al-Bashir to murder 300,000 people with conservative estimate of the UN, then it will work for al-Burhan and Hemeti to kill millions, and they can get away with it. And now they have friends in the international community and regional actors with oil money like United Arab Emirates. Two things I wanted to note that my colleague have addressed, and also the senator, is the fact and realities on the ground about the RSF and SAF. Both of them, of course, are faces, two faces of the one coin. However, we are operating right now in 10 states. Many others are also operating, as Hanin mentioned, in 35 places or localities. We cannot operate in the places that are controlled by the rapid support forces. In my hometown, people are starving. We could not do, our organization cannot operate. We cannot operate in Zalinje, Niala, or West Kordofan. People are dying simply because RSF will not allow people to operate. They confiscate and loot and bomb WFP trucks. So that has to be clear that, and because they are emboldened due to the support they are getting from Emirates, not support they are getting, but also the political backing of the emirate. They flew people here from the United States to lobby the EU when the EU was issuing resolution trying to condemn the emirate and fluing Sudanese. There are Sudanese Americans who are sitting here and affiliated with RSF, celebrating when our people were murdered in Al-Fashir. So I urge you to advocate to the U.S. to have strong measures that no one should be sitting in the United States and be celebrating murder of people in Darfur or anywhere in Sudan. And we hope that accountability will be a priority, because in Sudan, without accountability, there will not be peace. And as much as you are advocating for ER, I wanted to know that there are thousands of affected community-led organizations. These organizations were created from the time of Bashir, when humanitarian aid was thrown out of the country. They continue to operate just like our organizations, and many other internet displaced-led, women-led, national civil society group. It's not just the EER. When advocacy is being, because these people don't have people outside of the country to advocate for them. And that is why it is very, very important. Mostly like ER are Khartoum-based. Of course, they work across the Sudan, but this mostly national NGOs, women-led organizations, these are the ones who become frontline humanitarian workers, but nobody recognize or speak about them. And this doesn't do justice if we don't recognize them, because these are the people who pay their life. Today, we have a number of them who have been arrested and abducted from Al-Fashir and imprisoned in Niala, including those who are part of our consortium. And because we are not speaking for them, then it is okay for the RSF to keep them arrested simply because they are rendering humanitarian services. So I thank you for listening to us, and I thank the senators for their leadership, but we hope that we continue to advocate for them to raise this issue with Trump's administration, asking for appointment of the special envoy sooner than later. Providing humanitarian aid and flexible funding that will be directly delivered to national, civil, local CBOs and community-based organizations, affected community-led organizations, and the EER, so that they can continue to help their people, because when the international community walked away, these are the people who brought hope again to us in Sudan, and we must not let them down again and again. And accountability for the United Arab Emirates is of particular importance. If we can hold them accountable, as Senator Warner pointed out, we will end the genocide in Sudan. Thank you.
Nima, thank you very much for the powerful words, for the personal reflection, and for the incredibly powerful reminder. You know, when a lot of people talk about the war in Sudan, they think it's too complicated to get their head around and understand who are the heroes. I mean, I think the heroes are in this room right here in front of us, and for the people you represent on the ground. So thank you so much. Dr. Imam, if you could bring us home, you've been covering and working in this conflict for decades now. Perhaps some words of wisdom to help us sort of frame what we have heard and how to take sort of the long view of the moment that we're in.
Thank you, everybody. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody who are attend this event and people who organize this event to give us chance to advocate what's going on in Sudan. Thank you very much. As they said, I'm professionally a surgeon, but because of injustice in Sudan, since 1990, I became a human rights activist. And I, myself, and my family will have to leave the country because of that. So I want to give you background of Sudanese conflict, why we're now this present war, South Sudan war, and Darfur genocide, and everything. I will give you background why this happened. First, there are 4 reasons or 4 contributors of Sudan conflict. The first one is Sudan armed forces. Okay? They always love power. They use military coups to come over the power in Sudan. And in Sudan, there were more than 20 military coups in Sudan, being by Sudan armed forces. And they ruled Sudan 58 to 60 years of 70 years of Sudan since 1957. So this is the first contributor to Sudan conflicts and Sudan problems. The second is the traditional parties and ideological parties. Traditional parties like Ummah Party and Democratic United. These are traditional ones, and the ideological parties are the Islamic Front and Communist Party. These 4 parties are our conflicts in Sudan is they contribute to. And these parties, they use Sudan armed forces to gain things that they cannot get through elections. They use Sudan armed forces to make military coups to rule. For example, 1958, there is President Abdullah Khalil. He is from Ummah Party. When they realized that their party is going to lose majority in parliament, he convinced General Aboud to make military coup. And General Aboud ruled 6 years after the military coup. And 1954, there's mass demonstrations or mass protests, and he have to resign because of that. After that, civilian government. But unfortunately, the Communist Party, 1969, May 25, 1969, they convinced Colonel Jafar Numeri, which is because all these parties, they have members in military force, and they use their members to make military coups. So Numeri ruled Sudan 16 years under military. Okay. After that, we got civilian government. 1989, the Islamic Front, they were in a government at that time, but because they want to be the unique or the only party that can rule Sudan, so they use Brigadier General Omar al-Bashir to do military coup, and they rule 30 years under military also. This, the parties, the second complex or second contributor of the Sudanese problems. The third problem is, the infrastructure development and basic services around capital and surrounding states, and neglecting remote states. They don't have. For example, Darfur, whole time we have just one pavement street. Darfur, one pavement street, whole Darfur. And we have a lot of resources, but they take our resources and give us nothing. This is because of that, and this is one of the contributors of the Darfur, of the Sudan conflict. The number 4 is injustice. Injustice in Sudan. And people use power to apply injustice selectively. That's what they do. This is number 4. And I have to give you some facts. Number 1, NCP regime or Bashir regime didn't fall. It's still there, didn't fall. But what they did after the 2019 protesters about to collapse the regime, they bring up 2 plans, Plan A and Plan B. Plan A, they brought what's called Ibn Auf, Jafar Ibn Auf. He is the Secretary of Defense of the regime himself. They brought him to declare to remove Bashir, and he took over. The protesters refused. They said, no, we don't want Ibn Auf. The plan B is Burhan, who is ruling now. That's their plan too. And they brought plan B, sorry. They brought Burhan, and also some of their members inside with protesters. And they said, hey, you refuse Ibn Auf. It is not good that we refuse also Burhan. They convinced some of protesters. No, I'm coming there. What do you say?
Go ahead.
Okay, that's what they did. And they brought Burhan, who is ruling now, and Burhan brought Muhammad Hamdan Doglo, who is leader of RSF. Okay, they all come together, and now there is who are like the leading protesters. They negotiate with Bashir and others, with Burhan and Muhammad Hamdan Doglo and others. They have military council. They negotiate, and there is something called constitutional document. They make council, 5 civilian, 5 military, and 1 they agree with it. Okay, now, what's going on? Okay. Okay, sorry, maybe I went a little bit far of the time. Sorry, I have a lot to say, so, okay. Anyhow, they did what's called a council, and after that, the transitional government, 39 months. And unfortunately, military choose to have 21 months, and they go first. After finish 21 months, they make a coup to the civilian government. Yes, and another one I want to say very fast, the Janjaweed, or the RSF is extension of Janjaweed. And everybody is supposed to know, they call RSF, but they are Janjaweed. And the last one is, as Imtisal said, Darfur genocide never ended. Yeah. And sorry, I have a lot to say.
The war in Sudan.
Okay, the last one, the war in Sudan. The reason of the present war, the reason of present war after they make a coup and put all the Abdullah Hamidok, who he was prime minister, and his cabinet, they put them in jail. Under pressure of the international, they released them, and now there was negotiations, and they come with something called framework agreement. The framework agreement means the SAF or Sudan Army Forces, they go to their compound. No more, no more to rule country.
Yeah,
This
thank you
is
so
one.
much. Yeah.
Number two, sorry about that. I have three things to say. Number
security.
two, okay.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Exactly what you said. Yeah, so just like you said, that the RSF and SAF should go back to their compounds. 3 things you can do right now is learn more about Sudan. You can talk to all of us. Support every civil society group, especially those of us who reach places that are not covered by Khartoum orgs and other things like that. And number 3 is understand that the U.S. is actually one of the only powers in the world that can end this war right now, today, if we wanted to. I say this as an American, as a survivor of genocide, and as someone who is so happy that you had us all here. Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate that.